There it comes. Whatever. There we go. Okay, we've gone. We've gone through this. This Jesus seminar, and unfortunately, it's the one that grabs the media. It's not mainline scholarship, but it's the one that grabs the media. And of course, now I want you to see this syncs with that methodology of suspicion that we were talking about the other day. You know, that there was a wisdom Christology and a Gnostic Christology and a Cynic Christology and Orthodox Christology, and the mean old Orthodox Jewish Christianity beat the others out. That goes right along with this, because there was this early Gnostic, Cynic kind of Christianity. It was really the earliest, but Jesus' disciples after that Judaized him and made him into the Messiah and so forth that the New Testament claims for him to be. It's really quite preposterous. The whole idea, and Crossan, of course, has tried, I was talking yesterday, but he's tried to write this book about Sepphoris, the main city in Galilee, which wasn't far from Nazareth, to try to show that it was Hellenistic, and in fact archaeology doesn't support that. But if we're going to evaluate them, oops, what happened? Wrong thing. Evaluation, first of all, the dating of the canonical Gospels, they date them as absolutely as late as possible. And attribute the highest degree of creativity to these gospel writers and to any from whom they receive their tradition. So they push the Gospels as far late and say, you know, all this Judaizing of Jesus took place before these were written. Of course, even they would have to admit you couldn't make the Gospels any later, really, than these dates. They act as if no eyewitnesses were still alive, or as if they had no interest in what Jesus was actually like. All this is important to remember. When they say Mark was written in the 70s, Matthew and Luke in the 80s, and John in the 90s, they are using the absolute latest dates, the terminus ad quem. Many scholars would argue for earlier dates. So first of all, you got to get rid of the synoptic evidence. It's late, as late as possible. The writers were very creative, and those who gave them the tradition were creative. They weren't really interested in carrying things on. And well, we're not going to say, we're going to discount any eyewitness report. The second critique is the date of the Gospel of Thomas. And this is one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but I'm asking you to read Fabricating Jesus. I don't know any book that really covers the different issues that have been raised about Jesus. Actually, I'll just tell you this. Craig Evans himself told me that when he writes the last chapter, which is all these weird kind of things, he said, he was just laughing himself crazy because of how crazy the stuff was. But then it isn't really funny. Yeah. Because, at first thing, it just seems like a great hee-haw. But then when you're caught up short and say it's not really funny that people are doing these stupid things. They're channeling views of Jesus and all kinds of things. But they affirm an impossibly early date. Oh, one of the main reasons why I have you read Craig Evans is he has the best explanation in English of the evidence for the late dating of the Gospel of Thomas. And that is crucial. It's also conclusive. They argue for an impossibly early date for the Gospel of Thomas, and there is absolutely no real evidence that dates this Gospel in the middle of the first century. Most scholars date Thomas no earlier than the middle. It really should be the last part of the 2nd century, and the Gospel of Peter even later. Let me say something quickly on that. Here's the evidence for the late dating of Thomas. First of all, Thomas appears to be dependent on the sayings of Jesus in the Synoptic Gospels, on those as they actually occur in the Synoptic Gospels, not any earlier edition of them. More than that, scholars have shown that it appears that Thomas is translated from the Syriac, And if you back translate it into Syriac, almost all the sayings are hooked together by catchwords. And so it has every evidence of being a back translation of Syriac. The kind of Gnosticism, the kind of things that are in Thomas have an affinity with other things in the Syrian church. And the Syrian church put a high value on Thomas as an apostle. The Syrian church, located in Syria and other areas of the Middle East today that we would call Iraq and Kuwait and all those kind of places, was very strong in the early centuries. They spoke Syriac, a language closely related to the Aramaic that Jesus spoke, and which was the lingua franca of that part of the world, and continued as the lingua franca of that part of the world until the Arab conquest. And even after the Arab conquest, it continued for some time. Arabic only displaced it gradually, and it is a Semitic language like Hebrew and Arabic. So it appears to be, Thomas appears to be dependent on the Gospels in Syriac. That makes it later. And this is all outlined in Evans for you. But more than that, a disciple of Justin Martyr called Tatian put together what was called the Diatessaron. Dia means according to, and Tessaron, 4. What it was is he took the four Gospels, the Synoptics and John, and interwove them into one narrative. And for some time, that was the gospel of the Syrian church. It was very popular in the Syrian church. And it appears, the scholars have demonstrated that Thomas is actually dependent on the Diatessaron. Well, the Diatessaron wasn't produced until 180 AD, which means Thomas has to be after 180. And so the evidence is quite clear. This history of Q thing, there's no evidence whatsoever that there was a non-eschatological proto-Q. That's pure gratuitous assumption. And in critiquing them, then they forget the evidence, they overlook the evidence that obviously comes from the middle of the first century. The Apostle Paul, 1 Thessalonians, Galatians. What kind of Jesus is there? There's no Gnostic Jesus there, no sinning Jesus there. He's the incarnate Son of God who died and rose again. It's coming again. It's right there in the middle of the first century. Nobody can deny it. They don't even try to deny that 1 Thessalonians and Galatians came from about 50 AD. They just don't mention it. Just to omit that altogether. And of course, 1st and 2nd Corinthians come from the early 50s. Romans from shortly thereafter. So we're not just talking about 1 Thessalonians and Galatians, but these other Pauline epistles are coming right there in the 50s. Then to say the least, the whole idea of a Hellenistic Jesus is completely counterintuitive. The idea that he was Greek to start with and made Jewish doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now I want to say they do misrepresent the evidence. Have I got this on your notes? The old classical liberals, they were honest. At least you could depend on them for integrity of argument. But these guys are always slippery. I mean, Crossan will tell you, yes, he believes in the resurrection and he believes in miracles. He believes in the resurrection, but not the bodily resurrection. That's equivalent to saying, I believe in water, but I don't believe it's wet. Because resurrection, by definition, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, in Jewish thought, is bodily resurrection. What he's trying to say is he believes in some kind of spiritual truth from it, or something. I don't know what. And he believes in miracles, but when you press him, what he will say is totally naturalistic. Yes, he believes that healings take place at Lourdes, the shrine at Lourdes. Healings took place at Delphi among the Greeks. That such kind of healings is part of the universe. It's just built into things. It's naturalistic. But he believes in miracles. That's how you follow how waffling that is, how deceptive it is to the average person. You follow me? Borg does such things as he derives a Sophia or wisdom Christology out of two passages. One of the passages is wisdom is justified by her children. I'm not sure how he twists that, but he twists it into being a Sophia Christology for Jesus, and then puts it on and makes it equal to Jesus, to the Christology of Jesus as the Son of God. Now just stop a minute for proportion. The Sophia Christology is not even apparent anywhere. He has to tease it and twist it out of two passages. And then he makes it equivalent to the Son of God Christology that's all over the New Testament. That's the kind of procedure you have here. There's some other stupid things, other really unacceptable things, because the Bible describes God as compassionate, and the Hebrew word from compassionate is related to the word for womb. Then God is wombish. He gives birth to us. If somebody did that on an exegesis paper for me, there are some worse things, some more egregious things in the book. Will the real Jesus please stand up? One of the contributors from the Jesus Seminar side argues this way. He says the gospel writers didn't really believe the things that they recorded happened, because if they had, one wouldn't have felt free to change and edit the other. Matthew wouldn't have felt free to change Mark if he really believed that the things that they were writing about happened. Now, you've got two alternatives here. First of all, anybody that knows anything about the ancient world knows that's totally bonkers. The way history was written in the ancient world was you took the historians before you and you rewrote what they said and added what you knew to it. That's standard. That's what you were doing as a historian, to pass on the tradition of history from the past. That was the standard way it was done. That's what happens in the Old Testament with Chronicles and Kings. Nobody would say that Chronicles doesn't believe that the chronicler didn't believe that David killed Goliath just because he rewrote Kings from a different perspective, post-exilic perspective, adding something to it. And in the Greek world, that was standard. So either this guy doesn't know the ancient world, or else he's deliberately perverting what he knows. He has a PhD. We know he knows the ancient world. What that says to me is these guys will twist the evidence any way they can to argue their point if they think they can get away with it. So you really got to be on your toes. You can't really even trust what they say. Their ideological bias, of course, is so patent. It's every bit as patent as classical liberalism was with that Jesus and existentialism was with their Jesus. They make Jesus conform to most postmodern egalitarianism. Their Jesus is so modern and so comfortable in that postmodern egalitarian environment. In private, they make no bones about their desire to undermine traditional Christianity and supplant its view of Jesus with a new fiction. Again, they really don't care if this view of Jesus is actually historically accurate. They just want people to accept it as the Jesus that determines our life and our faith.